Good evening, welcome to tonight's edition of Resistance TV. Tonight we're talking about fuel poverty, and it was 20 years ago, in fact, that John Prescott announced to the world that the government would eradicate fuel poverty, wipe it out, I think his words were, by the year 2010. Well, here we are 11 years later, and we've still got millions of people living in fuel poverty. So Ofgem's decision to increase the price cap by almost £100 is going to have a profoundly damaging effect, I think, on many households, particularly when people are struggling with the consequences of the COVID crisis and on furlough and reductions in salaries, etc. And joining us this evening to talk about this is Ruth London from Fuel Poverty Action. So Ruth, can you just perhaps give us your take on your reaction to Ofgem's decision and what's the likely impact you think it will have on households? Because as I understand it, there are still, as I've said, millions of people who are really struggling to pay their fuel bills already. And so with this additional burden with lower incomes, it's going to be a real problem for them, isn't it?
It certainly is. A couple of pounds a week might not sound like a lot to people who have plenty, but a lot of people are really struggling now. People are cold and also hungry, and it's a bad combination, cold and hunger, especially when there's illness about. And a couple of pounds a week means a great deal, but we have to remember that for many, many people, it's not that amount. That £96 a week, they say, that's an average, and for a lot of people who don't have well-insulated homes or don't have efficient heaters, or have homes that are in bad repair and the windows are leaking and there's drafts everywhere, or have damp and mold, in those kind of conditions, you're paying a lot more, you're using a lot more heat, and therefore you're going to pay a lot more in addition. So it's not going to be an increase of £96 a week. It's going to be an increase, sometimes double that, sometimes even more. Yeah. And that has a really, really serious impact.
Yes, no, indeed. And I remember, and it's £96 per year, I think, isn't it? You meant rather than £96 a week. I think it was a slip of the tongue there, actually. But
sorry, yes. Yes. Sorry. It was a slip of the tongue, definitely. Yes, it's a year, yeah.
Yes, indeed. But I remember back in the day when I was still an MP, and I remember asking David Cameron at PMQs in 2012, because he'd been at an energy summit and he was claiming that they were going to take steps to address this issue. And I asked him what progress he'd made on that issue, because we knew that there was still a lot of people struggling to pay their energy bills. And he claimed at that time that they were going to legislate to ensure that, to force energy companies to offer people the lowest energy tariff. What's happened to that?
Going back a ways, when the originally public companies, British Gas and Electric were public companies, nationally owned, and they were privatized. And when they were privatized, they set up all these rules and regulations, and they set up Ofgem to regulate. And Ofgem has tried, but they're attempting the impossible, really, because these companies are private companies and they're profit making. That's how they function. And their decisions are made with that in mind. And the big decisions about what kind of fuel we use, for instance, and whether we use fuel at all, or whether we're, turning to renewables, which in the end are ever so much cheaper, the sun and the wind, once you've done the investment, they're not quite free, but pretty near. And things could be done very differently, but they're not. And once you have something set up that badly, then things like saying, okay, you have to be put on, the cheaper tariff, or there's this protection or that protection. Lately there's been quite a lot of protections brought in because of COVID. And, even before that, Ofgem were trying to bring in things that said, well, energy companies, you can't just cut people off. But everything comes down to there should be some little bit of money that is given to people, but you get it once. You don't get it again and again and again, every month when you need it. And the fact is that people can't afford those bills.
No.
And that's a matter of incomes as well. It's for a price to be too high, it's not necessarily the problem with the price. It can be a problem with the fact that you don't have enough money. And of course, now, especially, that's true. But before COVID, about 10,000 people every year were dying because they couldn't heat their homes. That's massive. And I know, we're talking about 100,000 now and, over 100,000 people dying. But I think it has actually brought people's attention to what it means, large numbers of deaths, whereas before, 10,000 a year, on average, some years more, some years less. But, it just, it happened and people just took it for granted, like, okay, this is something that happens in the winter. And, it's never been acceptable for, in a rich country like this, where people are really stashing it away now. It's never been acceptable, or even in a poor country for that matter, for people to be dying of cold. That is just not
well, it's shocking,
terrible.
isn't it? I mean, we are the 5th biggest economy in the world, something I keep railing about, and it is utterly unacceptable. And for me, it's unacceptable that anybody's living in poverty, let alone struggling to pay their own fuel bills. But I was looking at some Office of National Statistics figures that were published in November before we went on air this evening, and that talked about an increase in excess winter deaths. I think it was 28,300 more excess winter deaths last winter than the previous winter. That was the 2020 winter. Now, obviously, with the advent of COVID, people on furlough, people in their homes for longer, having the heating on there for longer in the day, is that going? I mean, I guess it's an obvious question, really, but I mean, what impact is that going to have? I mean, some of the kind of predictions are that this is going to be pretty catastrophic for a lot of people. They're really going to struggle to pay their bills, and that excess winter death, the number of excess winter deaths, many of which, as you say, are put down to cold homes, is going to increase.
It will increase exponentially, but nobody will know how much, because a lot of it's going to be put down to COVID. And, there's a lot of things happening in this country that are going to be put down to COVID. And COVID is certainly exacerbating everything and exposing everything, showing up everything and making everything much worse. But it's not the only problem. And, incomes were already too low. Wages were too low. Pensions were too low. Benefits were too low. Even the government had to put up universal credit, £20.
That's the plan to reduce that again, isn't it? We had a program a couple of weeks ago where we were talking about the plan to take that £20 increase off universal credit.
Exactly.
So another.
Yeah. And the other thing that's really important now, I mean, there's a lot of talk about furlough, but there's not that much talk about sick pay. And, sick pay is actually critical to COVID, because if people, don't get money for staying home and isolating, they can't afford to do it. And, a lot of other countries are paying, 100% or 80%, and here, they call it lockdown, and they've locked down quite a lot of things that people enjoy, but they haven't locked down work.
No.
You're expected to go in, and a lot of employers are not letting people even work from home. So that it's suicidal, that this policy. So sick pay, furlough, disability benefits, which was already, like the winter deaths, disability benefits were leading to lots and lots of deaths, and sanctions. Sanctions when people are on benefits and they turn up late to an appointment because some perfectly reasonable reason, and that's it. You're off.
Yeah.
So all of those things are part of this crisis, and then they try to say, well, we're going to make sure that nobody's dying of cold, and it's just meaningless.
Yeah.
I mean, the protections, people should know about them. That it is important that there's been an agreement reached between energy companies and the suppliers about being cut off. And if you're on a prepayment meter, which many people who are hard up have a prepayment meter, and they're supposed to not be excluded from this protection. You're supposed to be able to get vouchers or get extra time and so on. And sometimes you can, and it's definitely worth knowing that we do have some rights now. But getting them implemented, it's very hard. And as I say, it's hard to get it again and again. And it's usually in the form of a loan, which, is to be paid back at some time. And what kind of future are we expecting where we're going to be able to pay back these loans?
No, indeed. I mean, and statutory sick pay, as you say, I mean, it's incredibly parsimonious. So it's about £95 a week, and people are expected to self-isolate for a fortnight on £95 a week. I mean, in the middle of winter, it just seems incredible, really, that this is what they're pursuing. But what went wrong with the John Prescott's commitment, which was a noble plan to wipe out fuel poverty by the year 2010? I mean, he set himself a goal within 9 years back in 2001 at the Labour Party conference, and then they never reached it. And we've still got, as we know, millions of people in fuel poverty. What happened with that? Because I think it was a laudable aim, wasn't it? I mean,
I'm not quite sure what happened between 2000 and 2010, but around 2010, 11, 12, there was the destruction of the Warm Front, which was a program of insulating and improving energy efficiency in homes, which was hugely important for the climate as well. And the climate also has a bearing on how cold we are and how hot we are in summer. And a lot of people are going to be needing cooling in the summer as well as heating in the winter. It's not just going to be excess winter deaths, there's excess summer deaths as well. And there was actually quite a successful rollout of a program, which was then destroyed.
Yeah, the one destroyed. Although having said that, I mean, One Front was around for a long time. Presumably that was the vehicle that Prescott was hoping would deliver the goal of eradicating fuel poverty, but it didn't work. So presumably they didn't put enough money behind it. I don't know. I mean, obviously it's not. It didn't eradicate it because we're still in the situation, and obviously it was made worse when the Tory, it was a coalition government, decided to scrap it.
Yes.
And here we are still, where in a situation where people are still struggling to pay their bills, and now they've had this blow with the Ofgem decision. It's a calamity of errors, really. It seems to me. I don't know what you think.
Yes, it is a calamity. I mean, it just combines with everything else. We talk about fuel poverty, and it's helpful to do that because it identifies something, but you can't actually separate your poverty into food poverty, fuel poverty, internet poverty, that they really are one thing. And, mothers are going without meals in order to ensure that their kids can keep warm. The money isn't in a particular pot like that. And, part of the reason why you couldn't eliminate fuel poverty just by insulating homes is because we're so poor for every other reason as well.
Well, indeed, it's a combination of things, I suppose, that need to be done. But I think there's more that perhaps needs to be done in relation to energy efficiency in homes. I mean, we made a start, didn't get anywhere near far enough, it seems to me. And you mentioned renewable energy, Ruth, as well. And clearly there's a connection there, and often that connection, I don't think, is made enough. I don't know what you think, between the importance of addressing which is an existential crisis for humanity, i.e. climate change, and the impact of doing that can have on people's quality of life in terms of lower fuel bills, more comfortable lifestyle, in terms of warmer homes and so on.
That's right.
What would your advice be to people watching this evening in terms of bringing pressure on policymakers to do more in this regard? Because I mean, there's lots of jobs that could be generated as a result of it. Tackle the kind of fuel poverty crisis that we've mentioned. Eliminate, well, maybe not eliminate, but certainly reduce the excess winter deaths that are associated with living in cold homes. I mean, there's so many things going for this. Meeting our obligations in relation to reducing carbon emissions into the atmosphere. I mean, to me, it just seems to me a no-brainer. I mean, what more can people do, do you think, to bring pressure to bear?
Well, fuel poverty was started actually by a lot of people from Climate Camp. And we didn't see that there was any contradiction between basically trying to preserve what we can of a livable climate on planet Earth and keeping warm. And we were continually being told that there was a contradiction, that if you were going to not destroy the climate, then what we needed was cheap fuel, and that was defined as fossil fuels, and in particular fracking. They were trying to push for fracking on the basis that it was going to make all our homes heated very cheaply. Part of Fuel Poverty Action's function has been to say, actually, it's not like that at all. The things that are going to make us more comfortable in our homes are the same things that are going to reduce climate change. We're not going to be able to stop it now, but we can limit it as much as we can. And that is energy efficiency at home. It's also renewable energy, but it's also good heating systems. And a lot of the work that we do is actually working with people on district heating systems, which are becoming more and more common. It's like communal heating. It's like central heating for a whole building or a whole housing estate or development or a district. It can...
on the continent, aren't they, Ruth, I believe?
They're very... Yeah, much more common and much more successful there. I mean, here it's been brought in on the basis of, again, a lot of private companies, all of them needing to, make their profit. And a lot of people who, frankly, don't know what they're doing. The heat networks have been badly designed, often oversized, which makes them more expensive, badly installed, badly maintained, badly run and administered, and then, add on very bad customer service, and you end up with sky-high prices, which doesn't need to be. There are some that are run very well and actually, do provide heat much more cheaply. But we're working on a day-to-day basis with people in a lot of different housing estates and developments, private leaseholders and tenants, council tenants, housing association tenants, who are basically being ripped off, and partly ripped off by people, creaming off funds, but partly ripped off by people who don't know what they're doing, and don't know how to balance the system and don't care.
Is there any scope, do you think, Ruth, for local campaign groups to help and encourage people to switch suppliers, help them in that process? Because a lot of people still haven't switched, have they, to the lower tariff? I mean, do you think that's a gimmick, or do you think it's worthwhile? And would it be something that local groups could maybe help people with who maybe are struggling to work their way through the system?
It is something that local groups do help people with. There's all sorts of groups that help with that. And there's a lot of community energy groups that help to produce renewable energy, for instance, from solar panels, and also help with retrofitting energy efficiency in homes, and a lot of them help people switch and also help make sure that people get the benefits that they're entitled to, and make sure that basic draft proofing and that kind of thing is done. So yes, all of that's very valuable. But
there was some grants. I don't know if you know whether a while ago, because I was involved myself actually when I came out of Parliament. I lost my seat in 2015 and got back in 2017 before carelessly losing it again in 2019. But in that interim period, we set up an advice service in Derby from my former constituency office, and one of the things that we were doing was helping people in on that specific issue of helping people to switch and so on. And there were some grants available at that time from the Energy Department to assist in that campaign, and we managed to draw down that funding to help with our campaigning. And I wonder whether those sorts of funds might still be available. So if there's any people who are watching this evening who in a local area who might be interested in establishing a local group, whether there might be any grants available to help them actually produce materials and so on to get that to people.
On an individual level, it can help. On a bigger level, if you think about it, the more when people switch, it's just going to lead to it'll lead to some evening out, and that's a good thing, because quite often the people who are paying the most have the least to begin with. And evening it out so that there's less difference between the highest prices and the lower prices, that is a good thing. But it's not going to really bring the prices down overall, because those are a function of how the system is run and what the costs are and what the profits are. And they will, if you bring some down, others will go up.
So we need to really, as well as help people on an individual level, we need to be trying to tear the system down and replace it with something that's more equitable and better. Really,
I think people have quite a strong instinct on that, because a lot of people don't want to switch, and they think it's a big con. And although it's true that you can save money, in the end, it is a big con, because it's being put forward as this is going to make it all right, and it is not. As if a lot of people go off the default, standard variable tariff, and go on to a fixed price, the fixed price will go up. It doesn't go up while you've got your contract for the fixed price for that year, but it will go up. And people know that. And already some of the fixed prices have already started going up because of the increase now, in the price cap. So and people are very aware. People are wise to what happens with supermarkets putting the prices up and so on, and they don't want to spend their time switching. And it's being made much more easy now, because there are these switching sites and so on that can really take a lot of the work out of it. It's still much more difficult, of course, if you're not if you're not on the web, or you're not used to using the web that much.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that was my experience. A lot of people, that we
there is help available. I mean, the help, it is an important thing to do, but it's not going to solve the problem.
No, indeed. I mean, there's a hassle factor with it as well, which obviously, and for every people, I guess where you got some local groups helping people to work their way through the system, there will still be others who, I guess, fall through the net. I just wanted, just before, because we're having a truncated program this evening, because Ruth has got some other commitments, so we're only going to be on air for just about half an hour or so. But before I bring Sean in to get some audience reaction, I just wondered, I think I read somewhere that Fuel Poverty Action has produced an energy bill of rights. Do you want to just say a little bit about that, Ruth? And then we'll go to Sean and get some reaction from the audience.
Right. Okay. We've set it up. If you can see a thing on our website, it looks like a bit like an energy bill, but it is a bill of rights, and it starts with the right to have energy that keeps us warm, and I can't even remember the wording of it right now, actually. Enough energy for our needs. And it then goes on to say we have a right to energy which doesn't destroy the planet, doesn't destroy the atmosphere, and doesn't pollute the air as well. Because pollution is a major problem in itself, even before you're talking about the climate, and a cause of very many deaths. And then it's a fair pricing system. We shouldn't be paying more for prepayment meters than you pay if you're, and the standing charge is a killer, because it actually means that people pay more more per unit if you use less, because even if you cut down your heating to practically zero, and lots of people are doing that now, when you get this problem that we spoke about at the beginning, where even if you get the little help once, you still can't pay the bills. What happens is that people just cut off. They do not put the heating on. They ration it, half an hour a day, maybe, just for when the kids come home from school.
Yes.
And that standing charge still has to be paid when you do that. So, that's another injustice. So we want fair pricing. We're actually exploring the idea of changing the pricing system altogether, so that instead of that upside down thing where you pay more per unit if you use less, you would pay less per unit if you use less. And that would be based on a band of free energy that everybody would get as a right to meet our needs. And then if you went above that, you'd pay more more than you do now.
What's your web address, Ruth, in case people want to check it out, the Bill of Rights?
Fuelpovertyaction.org.
Great. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
we'll put this out on our platforms as well, actually, because I think that's a good local campaign, and in terms of raising awareness and so on, I think we need to be doing a lot more on this topic, particularly in view of the impact of the COVID crisis and so on. And those horrifying excess winter death figures are related to cold homes in the 5th biggest economy in the world. It's truly shameful.
I mean, we'd be very glad for people to join us. We're welcoming new members, and
right,
we work on a lot of different local campaigns. For instance, on cladding, we've been very much involved in with some people in Salford who have blocks that are just like Grenfell, basically. They only just got their cladding off this last autumn, and now they're this winter without any kind of insulation on their buildings. And in a tower block, in the north of England, this is really, really hard, and they're being offered very little to compensate for that, and they can't get warm whatever they do. So we're working with people in individual places, and we're not a big NGO. We don't have any funding. We don't have an office. We don't have a staff, and it's people campaigning on their own behalf, like people who are living in that situation in Salford, with the cladding off, and people who are living with the district heating systems, are part of our group and our movement. So we try to expand ourselves as much as we can. Of course, there's some limits to what we can do, and we're very grateful for help and also grateful for donations. If people can do that, we have something called Friends of FPA, where people can actually sign up to make a regular donation. That helps us a lot to keep going.
No, indeed. Well, hopefully, we'll encourage a few people to your site and be encouraging them to join and hopefully get involved in some of the campaigning. But let me bring in Sean now in the last few moments to just get the audience reaction to what Ruth has been saying this evening. Over to you, Sean.
Good evening, Ruth. Nice to see you. It's been really educational once again, not only for us, but for also the people watching there tonight. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot more people watching this after the event. I've already posted out the link to your website, so people are going to be looking on that now. And obviously, it's something that our members will be very keen to get involved with on a local level. So if there is any local fuel poverty action groups around the country, if they want to get in touch with us, then we'll pass your details on to our regional organisers who will get in touch with you, and let's do what we can to help people out there. So we've had a few people making comments, actually, not many questions tonight, but lots of people making comments, because I don't think people are fully aware of what's going on in the country with fuel poverty, unless you're actually in that awful situation. Varan says, this is a human rights disaster in a wealthy country, always enough money for military illegal adventures and salary increases for corrupt politicians. It's not suicidal, it's murder. The Funkydelic fan, he says, water, domestic heating, lighting, public transport and broadband should be a public service like healthcare and education. Couldn't agree more with that. Varan again says, time for a government of national unity with sensible people solving problems, not playing how rich am I. Chris Norton says, I was going to mention climate change, actually. Where I live, it gets very hot in the summer. Despite it being a new block, climate change might be a factor, but I think we should be building on this. Varan comes back again. The Labour manifesto is the blueprint to stop poverty and heal the climate. That's why they crucified Jeremy Corbyn. My goodness, 2,000 years, and we still abuse people who care about other people. And I was just telling the people in the chat that we will be starting our policy hubs very shortly. Well, we'll be holding short conferences so that members, activists, grassroots activists, campaigners and academics can all come together to start to discuss what our policies will be going forward. So we welcome everybody to join us at the resistmovement.org.uk. UK, and please, come and be part of that discussion and that debate. Mark Anderson says, do local councils still give energy efficiency advice as ours did 20 years ago, or do they no longer bother?
Do you know whether they do, Ruth?
I think it's mostly farmed out. For instance, in London, there's a group called Shine that was started by people in Islington, and is now London-wide. And they actually, when there isn't COVID, go round to people's houses and assess what could make it more energy efficient and make sure people get the right benefits and so on. So I don't know if like a council office is still doing it in many places. Perhaps they are, but there are certainly around the country in many places there are similar groups who have come up either out of voluntary organizing, or started by the local authority themselves to do that job. Can I just say one thing that would be really helpful that people can do is anybody who's actually in the situation who would like to speak out, because we get a lot of requests from the media for people to actually say what the truth is. And sometimes we find that people don't want to do it because they're worried about what their family or their neighbors or workmates or whatever are going to think about them, saying that they're in. There's a stigma. And, what we really need is people who are ready to put the shame where it belongs and say, look, I'm not ashamed of this. They should be ashamed.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And for people who actually can speak for themselves, that's the best way. And do get in touch if you feel like you'd like to, take the opportunity, because we do get quite a lot of opportunities for people to do that. And it would be a real help to the movement. And, you might want to get involved in other ways as well if you're in that situation. But that's one good way to help.
Well, one of the things we're hoping through our movement, Ruth, is to encourage people to come together and campaign on these sorts of issues. And on the point about local authorities, I think, as you say, it's patchy around the country. Different funding streams for local authorities, some may or may not be offering that sort of support. But one of the things I think we can do at a local level is to put pressure on the local authority to actually be providing this type of support and activity. And there are a range of things, without going into the details, because we haven't got time this evening, ways in which local government can raise the finance. And the excuse that has been given for the last decade or more, that it's down to the government cuts since 2012, the Local Government Finance Act gives local authorities a great deal of flexibility now. They would then have to go to a referendum of the local populace to bring in this additional resource. But it's something which I think local groups could be bringing pressure to bear on their local authorities. And on the point actually about the number of excess winter deaths associated with cold homes, there was an article in the British Medical Journal, I think it was relatively recent, might have been last week, or anyway, relatively recently. It's a very hard-hitting editorial, and they referred to the excess COVID deaths as social murder, and they were saying governments are culpable, not just the British government, but governments around the world, with the deaths, and many of these deaths are preventable. And of course, I think our concern is, from what you're saying, Ruth, this evening, that as a result of the pandemic, that the COVID crisis is going to exacerbate that, and there'll be more people losing their lives. And this is a form of social murder, and we should be calling out for what it is. It is a true scandal, and
it is absolutely.
We can to come together to bring pressure to bear on the policymakers, and where we can do things in the community ourselves, give people, if you like, the wherewithal to organise solutions, collective solutions locally. Then that's something.
Another thing that local authorities have to do with is planning, and what's happening with buildings and heating systems now is really lethal in itself, and you don't see the results right away. But I was interested in one of the people calling in or on the chat was saying about a new building being too hot. That's quite common. It may well have to do with a district heating system, a heat network, where the the pipes are kept on, the system's kept on in the summer because you need it for hot water, because the hot water and heat are tied in together, and a lot of communal areas become very hot, and the flats become very hot. So it may be to do with that, but it may also be to do with the architecture and the way they're designed, and just not enough attention being paid to the fact that we are getting hotter and hotter, and it's happening very fast. And the kind of buildings that we make now really have to take account of that. Dealing with climate change is not only a matter of preventing as much as we can of it, but actually mitigating what it causes. And local authority planners have a lot to do with that. And just handing it over to some developers who are not interested in things like that, that doesn't do it.
That's something else, I think, which is important then, isn't it, in terms of, as we're raising people's consciousness in that sense and expectations, is giving people that information to be demanding better standards of design and so on. It's totally outrageous if these things are relatively new and those things haven't been thought through. The point you just made, Ruth, about keeping the hot water and the kind of heating, as it were, on together in the summer just to kind of feed the hot water system. It's a disgrace, and often I think they kind of get away with it often because people in those in that accommodation are are in social housing, and it's
well, they're not necessarily. It's in a lot of private leasehold as well, and a lot of so leaseholds are. I used to think that people who owned their own houses were very well off, and it's not true. I mean, people have been forced to buy leasehold because there's no council.
The standards are across the piece then, which is interesting, and but often the people who are slightly better off and the well-heeled, as it were, the middle class with the sharp elbows are often in a good position to demand those better standards and improvements, and where the designers and the the suppliers of services and so on have fallen short, that they can then call them to account. But we need to be making sure that they're held to account right across the piece. And
the important thing is for people to be able to get together on their estates and developments, because in many cases the same building has some leaseholders and some tenants of housing associations, and there's a big division, and people don't necessarily talk together. But in other places they have actually come together, and they have tenants and residents associations that has both, and they're very much stronger for it.
Well, hopefully we can help to move that along. I know you've got to shoot off, Ruth. Thank you for taking the time out of a very busy schedule. It's been a really fascinating and interesting discussion this evening, and hopefully it will have spurred people into action and given people some useful information as well that they can utilize and hopefully improve their own circumstances and maybe help others in their own local community. So thanks very much indeed for taking time out, and thank everybody for watching this evening. We'll be back again next week at the same time, 7 o'clock. So please join us then, 7 p.m. next Wednesday. Thanks for watching, and good night.
Thank you.